Well, happy Aloha Friday. It is December 11th. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yunji Denise. And of course, this is Spotlight Hawaii. We've made it to the end of another week here as we sort of count down what has been a pretty crazy year here in 2020 as we're nearing the end. And one of the things that we want to talk about today, Yunji, is focusing on not only our economy, but what things look like for the state of Hawaii and the economic impacts of COVID-19 moving forward.
That's right. We've talked a lot about the impact on local businesses, but we really want to take a bird's eye view of the state's picture overall, where it is now, where it's going. And we've called in the big guns today. We have Dr. Carl Bonham from UHERO, which of course is the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. He is their executive director. He's a professor of economics. He's also on the House Select Committee for COVID-19 Economic and Financial Preparedness. So he's brought us some slides and some data. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's start with the basics. How are we doing?
Thanks for having me. How are we doing? Well, it's been obviously it's been a very rough ride. The recovery has sort of been on again, off again, and you know the slide that I think is on the screen, but there we go. The slide that we're looking at right now shows the cumulative change in jobs for both the U.S. economy and for the Hawaii economy to sort of show the contrast. And the U.S. economy, it's measured in millions of jobs on the right axis. And so after losing roughly 21 million jobs in April, the U.S. economy has had this sort of initially rapid and then a slowing recovery to a loss of only 9.8 million jobs. Hawaii lost about 130,000 jobs in April. Had a little bit of a bounce with the PPP loans and with the initial reopening of the economy in the middle of May, and then went back downhill as we had our second surge and the second shutdown on Oahu. The recovery since then has started again, but you get this sort of on again, off again as you sort of play whack-a-mole with the virus. And the good news is that right now the virus seems to be mostly under control on Oahu. And in if you look at where the jobs are being lost, there's really no good place to be right now. Federal government, so this is growth rate through October. So for the whole year through October, first 10 months of 2020, of course, the biggest losses are in tourism, in leisure hospitality, in transportation, where we're talking about 35 to 40% job losses. The losses in trade, I really don't think that data is reflecting what's happening on the ground. And all this data gets revised, and my expectation is that the retail and wholesale trade job losses are actually quite a bit more than 10% through the first 10 months of the year. And so the only places we've seen any kind of gains, and they're very small, have been federal government. So that's federal civilian, and then in construction. And if you go to the next slide, so one of the things that we've done at UHERO is we've put together an economic index. We call it the Economic Pulse Index, and that's the gray line here. It's measured on the right axis. And we're using it to really forecast. So this is a weekly index. The blue line measured on the left axis is employment. And so because the Economic Pulse has turned up since the middle of September, and it's been a relatively steady increase and accelerating a little bit with the Safe Travels program. This is telling us that when we get the November jobs data later this month, actually it'll be in about a week, it's likely to show another increase. And we saw almost a 30,000 person increase in employment in the month of October. And so we're looking towards another 10, 20,000 gain in employment in November. And we just started getting the December data, and that's continuing to point up. Of course, all of that will depend on whether we're able to keep the virus under control locally. We can keep the economy completely as open as it is right now, and also what kind of progress we see in terms of tourism and the Safe Travels program.
To follow up a little bit on some of those slides there, especially with that first one, when you look at the disparity between what's happening nationally and what's happening here locally with the economy in terms of jobs, there's obviously a significant difference in the growth and the bounce back of Hawaii's economy, and yet our numbers case-wide continue to be the best in the nation. So it really strikes that balance between safety and the thriving of the economy. As an economist, how do you sort of measure that? Of course, public safety and health is important, but when you're looking at those two graphs and you also seeing the strike contrasting, what are some of the conversations that you're having when you're in the COVID Select Committee and talking with lawmakers and leaders in the community about trying to find this balance?
That's a great question, and it really is a balance, right? There are trade-offs, and public health is really priority number one, and I think everybody agrees with that. But we're not going to be in a situation where we have zero COVID cases. That's just not the reality that we live in. And if we did, it would be because we had completely shut off interaction, right? So we wouldn't be meeting with each other. We wouldn't be the economy would basically be shut down. And so that kind of a balance is not going to work, because there are significant health costs, there's significant social costs to not having work, right? For long-term unemployment is incredibly damaging. Not being able to have our kids in school, all of that is damaging. So we have to find this balance. And it strikes most of the people on the House Select Committee meeting. We're really looking at a situation where we think we found that balance. And granted, there are some differences across counties, but it appears that we've done a good job of managing the virus. And there's been really significant improvement in Department of Health and their ability to contact trace and their ability to sort of tell us where the cases are coming from and what the risk factors are. And all of that's been really important. The distinction that you made between the U.S. and Hawaii. So many states, many locales opened up much more aggressively than Hawaii did, and partly as a result of that, they've also had many more cases and many more hospitalizations. And so it works both ways, right? So if you're restrictive, you have fewer cases. The less mobile we are and the less active we are in the economy, you have fewer cases. At the same time, if you have a surge in cases, it's going to feed back and people are going to stay home even without a shutdown order, right? We saw that in the summer on Oahu. Economic activity started falling off long before the second stay-at-home order happened.
I wonder talking about that second graphic that you showed us and just the loss across industries in terms of job loss, how many of those jobs can we recover? When a small business closes down, it's not like, okay, the vaccine is here, let's turn the lights back on. So for Hawaii's economy, what are the businesses or sort of sectors you think are the most vulnerable and perhaps are not coming back?
Well, clearly, food service type jobs, restaurant, bars, retail, those are extremely vulnerable to prolonged loss of jobs. And but keep in mind, one of the key things will be whether or not existing entrepreneurs and new entrepreneurs have access to capital to restart businesses. So when we have a vaccine and we get back to some level of normalcy, if you will, not necessarily the old normal, but a relatively higher level of tourism spending in the islands, and local residents are out and able to sort of get back to some normal level of activity, businesses will restart. It's just going to take time. And people who have either lost businesses or have lost jobs in sectors that they don't want to return to. So you could imagine a bartender who decides that they're going to launch a new career by doing a pop-up something or a home delivery service of some kind. And you've already seen some of this, right? And the best, the sort of most innovative businesses have already pivoted, right? And they're already figuring out ways to sell their products online, sell them globally online, sell them through delivery services, and do way more takeout. And so all of that is part of the process, but it takes time. So yes, for a period of time, there are going to be big pukas in those areas, in food service, in restaurants and bars, in anything leisure and hospitality.
Well, there's no doubt that one of those industries that's going to play a vital role is tourism, and really welcoming guests back to Hawaii and getting that part of the economy started up once again. Wondering if we can take a look at sort of the impact of the tourism numbers, of course, but also the Safe Travels program and what we're seeing in terms of how the fluctuations and the changes in rules and regulations have also significantly impacted the economy overall.
You know, the bottom line is that in the short run, the only thing that will make a significant difference in getting people back to work, it really is bringing back tourists, bringing back tourist dollars. And the Safe Travels program, this graph shows the daily deplaning visitors. So these are not total travelers. These are people who, and the links at the bottom actually point at blogs that Jim Mack and I wrote, and to the end of the raw data. And so these are actually classified as visitors. The data all comes from the Safe Travels program, right? Everybody has to enter into an app what they're doing and their test results and so on. And so you can see the very low number of visitors coming before October 15th. And then during the month of October, we recovered visitor arrivals to about 18% of 2019 levels. In November, it was more like a quarter. It was 22% of 2019 levels. In December, we haven't seen an enormous drop off yet. We are running below November averages, but that's to be expected because it's the first week of November, the first 10 days of the first 10 days of December are not normally a very high period for tourism. It's leading up to the Christmas holidays. But what has happened, if you see the green bars here, can you go back one second? The green bars here are Lihue, right? So what I've got here is stacked Honolulu, Kahului, Kona, and Lihue. And you'll notice that the green bars sort of disappear. So as of December 2nd, Kauai was averaging over 700 visitors a day during the month of November. And on December 2nd, they went back to the 14-day quarantine. And since December 2nd, they're averaging about less than 30 visitors a day. And so, that's where making those. So the question is, are there other ways? So for example, Maui just shut down their bars. And, I have friends who run bars on Maui, and I know it's hurting them. But as I mentioned earlier, Department of Health is sharing with us data now that can help us to manage the risk. And if we know that we're having spread in specific locations, and we actually know how many, we have pretty good data on how many cases are coming because of visitors in the islands. And it amounts to a relatively low number, like 1 case a day that's because of visitors. And so if we can manage that, then we can get visitors back to some normal level. And this graph shows you what we assumed in the forecast we released today, so that you can see. So this is the percentage of visitors of 2019 visitor arrivals that happened in October. There's 18% in October, 22% in November, and then the rest of this is our assumptions. So we actually assumed that December, January, February would not be as good as November. So we'd be back down to 18% of 2019 levels. And the reason we assumed that was because of the surge in cases on the mainland and the changes in policy, including the requirement that you have to get your test results before you depart the mainland. We've also raised the outlook in the out years. So these are all assumptions about the path of visitors. So we're now assuming a little bit faster recovery after June because of the vaccine. And then the high scenario and the low scenario just reflect different assumptions. The low scenario is really one where the surge on the mainland gets so bad that people can't even get tests in order to participate in the Safe Travels program. And it also involves the potential for an outbreak in Hawaii that would lead us to shut down. And so we take those numbers and use them in our model, and it gives us, so it basically determines the path of visitor arrivals through next year, and then from there on out, we run the model and get a set of scenarios. And one of the things to take away from this is that the outlook is insanely uncertain, right? The difference in 2021, the difference between our pessimistic and our optimistic scenarios is well over 1 million visitors a quarter. So there's a tremendous uncertainty because it depends on the virus, right? Are we going to play whack-a-mole and have to shut things down again? It depends on people's behavior. It depends on policy in Washington, policy in Hawaii, and it's really, and that's why we're doing these scenarios. And that's the way businesses are working as well. No one knows what the outcome is going to look like next year. Presumably, it's going to be a lot better than 2020, but there's still a huge amount of uncertainty.
Last year, 2019, we were looking at 10 million visitors coming to our islands. Do we anticipate, because I was looking at that, I believe it was the third slide that you had, or the second slide that you had showed us, the ceiling was at like 3 million. So when do we expect to?
So that's quarterly data, right? Okay. And so in 2019, if you had looked at that, the maximum was about 2.7 million in I think the second quarter of 2019. And so basically our forecasts get us back to around a little bit more than 8 million, 8.5 million. And some people who are doing forecasting are saying they're making some of these decisions based on the Great Recession, right? So this is how long it took us to recover from the Great Recession, and so we're going to use that same assumption. I don't think that really makes that much sense. This is not the Great Recession. It's extremely different. It's very, very different. But so the primary thing, there's two things that are driving our result that we don't get back to even 9 million visitors, and that's changing attitudes in Hawaii. And part of that shows up in willingness to enforce existing regulations on short-term vacation rentals. Right, and so on Oahu, we had over 10,000 short-term vacation rentals before the pandemic. Now there's maybe 2,000 to 3,000. So we've lost about 7,000 vacation rentals that are now trying to find something to do with them. Right, either rent them, sell them, and they're illegal. And the city, we've seen announcements of new agreements with the platforms that advertise these rentals, that they're only going to advertise legal rentals either with permits, and so it's going to be much easier for the city and county of Honolulu to enforce their existing regulations. So if you take 7,000 vacation rentals out of the tourism pool, then you simply you can only fill the hotel so much, and so you can have fewer visitors and potentially have more spending, because you get occupancy rates higher and room rates higher, for example.
I want to kind of pivot the conversation over to what was recently announced earlier this week and the governor's plans to implement furloughs for state workers. Talk about the significant impact that will have also on the recovery of the economy. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult and slow down that process, but what are some of the things that you are sort of looking at when you calculate sort of the forecast and now factoring in that we could be seeing these furloughs for state workers?
So, we sort of have a policy of trying to, in our baseline forecast, really try to only include things that we already know. And so while it was highly likely that we were going to see some kind of furlough announcement, we put those in our low scenario. And, our low scenario, if you look at the difference between our baseline and our low for gross domestic product for the state, the difference is about 10%. Actually, that's between our high and our low. So there's a lot more going in there, right? There's different tourism scenarios as well. But the reduction in state spending, that's going to happen, right? We know that state spending is going down because revenues have gone down, and we have a balanced budget requirement. And the state's already borrowed, I think it's $750 million with short-term borrowing, and they've already postponed payments to the retirement system. And so, they are doing many of the things that you would want them to do. The question is really, are we going to get additional federal stimulus? Is there additional money in special funds it's scattered about? It's kind of like Kobe beef. The fat's all marbled everywhere. You got to go find it. And is there a way to avoid really draconian cuts to things like public education that can be so devastating? And that's really where the federal money is so important. When we put this into the baseline, we put $300 million of spending cuts into our baseline forecast. It'll generate a drop in GDP of probably $450 million. So you get the initial effect of the spending, and then you get the follow-on effects of those teachers who just lost 2 days a month in income. They have to pay their rent, so they don't. That 10% cut means they don't eat out, or they don't spend it somewhere else in the community. And so one thing we know is that the cuts in state spending had an enormous impact on how slow the recovery from the Great Recession was. And so just when the economy was really starting to recover in 2010, 2011, states sort of hit a wall on their budgets and started their cuts, and the federal government pulled back their spending. So if we repeat that, we're going to get the same kind of results, and they're not good.
For anyone running for office in this town will always talk about diversifying the economy. They want to bring in different kinds of jobs. How realistic is that? I think we're also in a point now, we've seen articles in the paper talking about how people are, getting used to having fewer visitors, and they like having fewer visitors. But it sounds like, obviously, without tourism, we can't crawl our way out of this. So how realistic is it to diversify Hawaii's economy? Where would those jobs be? We hear a lot of talk about ag, but when you actually look at the impact of ag, it is so minimal. Is there a place to find other work?
The challenge with diversification is multifaceted. One of them is that it just takes a really long time, right? So there is no button that a policymaker can push or we can wish for that will replace tourism spending in our economy. It just isn't there. There's nothing that you can do now that 6 months from now, will replace several million visitors worth of spending. It doesn't mean it's not a good goal to think about what we can do to make it easier for businesses to operate, and particularly a really key feature in diversification is, these people who have lost jobs need to be retrained, right? So we need programs to help people transfer from, whether it's a bartender, not to pick on bars, but a bartender or a restaurant owner, or whatever they've been doing in the past that is very impacted here, and they choose to do something different, whether it's remote work, right? So one possibility is that we train more of our residents to do remote work. But whatever it is, we need to make it as easy as possible, right? It needs to be really, really simple for people to go to community colleges or go to UH and get retrained, and also to start new businesses, right? The regulatory burden to starting businesses needs to be looked at very carefully. And those things, but again, those things all take time, right? They take years to really make a difference. And one of the key lessons from development economics is really that you don't want to go out and dump a bunch of public money, state money, on a program to try and create a new industry. That's highly unlikely to be successful. What you want to do is build on your strengths. And we have strengths in tourism, we have strengths in insurance, we have strengths in astronomy, we have a very, very strong research university. We need to build on all of those. And we are making progress in sort of the area of entrepreneurialism, and some of it is in technology, and we have probably 6 or 7 accelerators, maybe more, that are operating, and the environment for entrepreneurialism in Hawaii has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. So we're poised to make small gains, but the key is that they're small.
Right. As we sort of wrap up here, I wondered if we can sort of take a look at sort of the big picture looking forward and sort of recapping what we discussed, but also moving into next year and some of the things that you're noticing as we kind of have one final graph to kind of get through here.
This is the one we have the exam on at the end. So you have to explain why job growth is so weak in 2020. That's the gold bars. And income growth is so strong. So actually, real income growth, of course, this is a forecast, will be wrong. And hopefully it will all be wrong and things will be much better. But and then in 2021, job growth is about 1%, and real income growth falls to 8%. And the reason for that is that we've seen seen $10 billion dropped in Hawaii's economy, and this is part of the reason why it's possible for people to say, gosh, it was really nice with no visitors in Waikiki. Well, because we just got $10 billion in federal government money dropped in our economy, so we're sort of hanging in there. But much of that money is going away next year, and that's really the reason for the difference. And then longer term, in our forecast, we get almost back to previous levels, pre-pandemic levels by the end of the forecast sample by 2025.
It's interesting to look at all of these graphs, but I wonder, just on a personal level, who are you most worried about in Hawaii's economy? Who do you think is the most at risk, and what do we see, sort of our community, how does that all shake out?
It's always the case that the people who are most vulnerable before the crisis are also the people who are most vulnerable during the crisis. And so it really is, the people who only had, a week's worth of rent in their bank account. The Alice families have just been made worse off. And actually, I think Phil Garboden, our HCRC chair in affordable housing, is coming out with a report next week that updates his estimates of really vulnerability for renters. And that's an area that I think is a real concern, because we don't have a plan for how we're going to deal with the back rent that families have been unable to pay, particularly after they lost the plus-up unemployment benefits. And for people who were self-employed, right now there's no plan for unemployment benefits for next year, right? So, if you were renting surfboards and giving surfing lessons as an entrepreneur, running your own business, and you lost 6 months of income, you're just now trying to dig out, and you still haven't paid your rent. We have no plan for that. And if I remember right, the latest data showed that 28% of Hawaii's renters didn't expect to be able to pay their rent, or didn't pay their rent in the last month. And that not only affects the renters, it also affects the landlords. And it's another example of where we really need federal money to help us through this.
Well, Professor Carwan from UHERO, thank you so much for taking time this morning to really break things down for us. I think it gave us a really good perspective of where we're at, and also some of those projections that you folks are so great at doing and continue to help to influence our policymakers and things that are happening within our community. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to have this conversation again, hopefully with some better news in the future.
Yes, we're all looking forward to a better 2021.
That's right. All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, Ryan, very interesting to hear his take there, especially that last bit about the renters, thinking that, as many as a quarter of them hadn't paid or might not be able to pay. And really the most vulnerable people in our community, just his statement, we don't have a plan for them, is pretty troubling. And also just his overall look at, yes, we've had $10 billion in the state. When you put it like that, of course, things seem like they are able to sort of limp along. But 2021, there's no CARES Act 2 as of yet.
That's right. And many people are concerned, and we're seeing it also in the comments, of course, when we have the unemployment office that are on here and the director that comes on to answer those questions, we can really hear from the people who are suffering and who are looking for support and relief in those areas and are worried. And we'll actually be speaking to the director later this month to hear a little more about those types of funding and additional funds that the unemployment office has been able to provide as that comes to an end, what the plan is moving forward into 2021. But also striking to just see some of those comparisons, the numbers, the impact, of course, as we all know that tourism has here in Hawaii, and how the Safe Travels program as well has impacted with the visitor arrival breakdown.
Right. And he also talked about the governor's plan, the $300 million that they're hoping to save by furloughing state workers, cutting salaries by an estimated 10% across the board. Senator Ron Kochi is going to be joining us on Monday. He's going to talk about what the legislature thinks of that plan, at least on his side so far, and perhaps some other initiatives that state lawmakers are looking at right now. So it'll be interesting to hear his take.
Yeah, that's right. As Sylvia Luke, who chairs the Finance Committee in the House, saying that she thinks the governor's math is actually off and that there is money there, that the furloughs aren't necessarily needed. And so we'll hear more from what the legislature thinks on Monday, as you mentioned. And we'll also be speaking, of course, with Lieutenant Governor Josh Green next week as well, as we sort of dive into this vaccine rollout that was just announced. We know that there are plans to have that happen within a few weeks here in Hawaii as we continue to see it rolling out throughout the country. And so we'll talk more with the Lieutenant Governor about that next week as well.
Yeah, that vaccine really, for so many of us, the light at the end of the tunnel. And he, of course, is leading the task force to get it distributed here in Hawaii. We should expect people to start getting those vaccinations in the next few weeks. And then on Friday, so many of you have asked about what's happening with education. Dr. Christina Kishimoto, she, of course, the superintendent of the Department of Education, is going to join us and take your questions about plans for 2021 and beyond. So we're very excited to have her. We've got a full week next week. Of course, we wish you have a safe weekend. Take care of one another. If you can, if you are doing any Christmas shopping, be sure to shop local.
That's right. We'll see you right back here on Monday at 10:30. Aloha.